this is not the first crisis that we've seen in the last decade. Even coming out of the financial crash, you had the challenges of even dealing with what was going to happen coming out of Brexit. You had COVID, then you had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and all of those crises, plural, all demanding some form of government action or government intervention. What lessons have we learned from those series of crises in terms of what might work in terms of government intervention and what maybe we need to be more cautious about? Is there anything, particularly from a UK government perspective, with a business hat on, that we would be looking for them to do?
Well, I suppose I think some of the lessons we have learned are, I think the public and perhaps the business community as well, we've become conditioned to UK government being able to do furlough schemes, to then intervene whenever we had, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the huge spike in gas prices. We saw then support for households and business community in terms of energy costs. And I think we've become accustomed to it's like the government will help out, not necessarily bail us out, but subsidise us, and that is almost like the first port of call and the expectation. And I think, given the state of the public finances, the UK public finances, that is now unrealistic. And you even think back to the global financial crisis. Before that, UK debt as a proportion of GDP was around 40%. Yeah. Whereas now, after all the various subsidies, effects for the bailouts of the banking sector, and then subsequently, whenever we had COVID, all of bailouts and additional public spending then, and
the fiscal rules,
and all of that, and we then have debt as a percentage of GDP is in the 90s sort of percent. So the room to manoeuvre, and I know you'll have politicians, local politicians, saying about these Rachel Reeves hemmed in by her own fiscal rules and things like that. There is a limit to what UK government can do, and they're pushing up towards the limits of that. So it's increasingly difficult. And I know there'll be sort of calls for reducing fuel duty, sort of tax cuts and things there. And that sounds like an obvious thing to do. But remember, one of the problems that we've got here is we've got a shortage of energy in terms of oil, and that's why the price is spiking. And when that feeds through into the likes of petrol and diesel as well, if you end up then subsidising the cost of that, that is potentially just going to, as the IMF says, that's pouring gasoline on the fire, and that will make prices higher for longer. And so so unfortunately, I think they often say in financial markets, the cure for high oil prices is high oil prices, that ultimately then there will have to be, the market will have to then, you'll see a decline in economic activity, a decline in demand, and that is how you're going to see prices fall. Whereas if you're actually throwing sort of subsidies, particularly if they're not targeted, to specific sectors, whether there's like agriculture or, the haulage industry, I cannot see that where the government is going to do that, other than do a kind of window dressing move to do something which is a token rather than being anything meaningful.
Yeah, and just to close that out, there's a lot of debate, a lot of discussion around what Stormont can do, what it can't do to help the business community, and not only with the cost of living crisis, but cost of doing business crisis. We're just around a year away from an election. We've obviously had some discussion around the Good Jobs Bill and whether there is sufficient time to scrutinise that, to have full cognizance of the potential impact that might have on SMEs. What can Stormont conceivably do within the next year to help the business community? Is it just those big structural issues from wastewater to planning to skills, or is there anything that they can do in terms of the immediate fuel crisis, for want of a better expression?
Well, I think the Northern Ireland public finances, as we highlighted earlier, are not in great shape. So even if the Stormont executive, who undoubtedly would have be sympathetic to the calls and the plight of households and businesses who are feeling these increased energy costs, this, intervening in this is, perhaps not a sensible thing to do, other than if you can do something targeted. For example, if it is in terms of the agriculture sector and how it is feeling difficulties, other than, because there isn't a pot of money around, particularly in Stormont, and I don't see anything meaningful really being forthcoming from Rachel Reeves either at this stage.
Sure.
Any money or funds for the likes of agriculture, I'm sure they would have to be then looking at allocating existing spending and reprioritising spending from existing Department of Agriculture and Environment and Rural Affairs budgets to that.
Yeah.
And whether, again, when you're having some of the monitoring rounds, if there's anything sort of left over, you'll have some potential pots of money which may sound big in terms of some sort of funds, but maybe like single digit sort of millions or something like that. But practically, they're not going to do much. And so the Stormont executive, other than doing some kind of fiscal window dressing, it doesn't have the power to deal with something which is outside of its control.
But does it put an onus on them to deal with some of those bigger issues, though, like wastewater, where you can see already the clear impact? Now, this isn't immediately solvable, but you can see the impact that it's having on the housing sector, for example, rental prices, house prices. Should the focus clearly be on those structural issues that are within their power and control?
Absolutely, because what we've seen is then a variety of crises have come along, whether it's COVID, whether it's the energy cost spike after the Russia invaded Ukraine, and food price inflation and all of those kind of things, whether it's Brexit. And invariably our local politicians, they've become fixated on the latest crisis and how they can deal with that. But what the problem is, and has been the problem in Northern Ireland, is how government has performed in between the various crises. So these crises will come and go and they're outside of our control.
Sure.
But it's what we're focused on week in, week out, month in, month out, on areas which are inside our control. What Rachel Reeves does or doesn't do, politicians can lobby for that. But what we do with our wastewater infrastructure, how we fund it, how we look at doing that, that is having a material impact. And we talk about crises and kind of emergencies. There's a housing emergency on at the minute.
Yeah.
And that is causing huge problems for households, for the citizens in this part of the world. And then, ultimately that's impacting sort of on businesses as well.
Yeah.
That is something which does lie in our control. And in my view, it's better focusing and redoubling our efforts in sorting out the problems that we can control and leaving those issues which are outside of our control to people better placed to deal with them.